The night was silent, a silence so deep it seemed eternal. Yet beneath that stillness moved 48 trucks, heavy not with grain, not with medicine, but with betrayal. $700 million of hidden steel cloaked in sacks of rice. Rocket launchers disguised as aid. Rifles packed like harvest. This was not a declaration of war. It was something colder. It was a design to suffocate a nation before a single shot was fired. Burkina Faso, a land too often dismissed, too often called peripheral, suddenly found itself at the center of a storm. A storm written not in treaties, but in barcodes. Not in speeches, but in crates. And in that storm stood one man, Captain Ibrahim Traoré, who refused to wait for dawn. When the order came from Ouagadougou's command, it was not panic that stirred the troops. It was resolve. Resolve to intercept. Resolve to expose. Resolve to turn silence into testimony. And let us be clear, my brothers and my sisters, this was no longer about borders on a map. This was about the dignity of a continent too long treated as a warehouse instead of a homeland. Stay with me, for this is more than a headline. This is more than a passing report. This is a hinge in history. What unfolded on that August night may yet redefine how the world will speak of Africa. So, pause right now. Do not merely watch. Be part of this testimony. Press subscribe, share this journey, and walk with us into the story of 48 trucks, a nation betrayed, and a continent rising. 19th of August. The air was heavy, pressing itself into the soil of the southern approaches of Burkina Faso. It was the kind of night when even the trees seemed to hold their breath. At precisely 3:47 in the morning, Captain Moussa Kabore pressed his eye to the thermal scope. What he saw was not the slow shuffle of farmers carrying goods to an early market. It was not the steady roll of aid trucks heading north with grain. No, what Kabore saw sent a chill through his bones. A convoy, 48 trucks. Headlights dark, plates stripped, engines murmuring low, trying to slip unnoticed along a dirt track near Canary, avoiding the main checkpoint. He whispered 4 words into his radio, words that would ripple across the continent. There is something wrong. Within minutes, the report reached Ouagadougou. Inside the command room, the red glow of a satellite feed fell across the face of President Ibrahim Traoré. Calm, steady, unflinching. His voice cut through the silence. Scramble special units. Get the drones airborne. Intercept them. Not one round must go astray. Those words were not shouted. They were spoken with authority, with the weight of a man who knew the dignity was on the line. Soldiers shifted their boots. Pilots adjusted their controls. Commando teams crossed scrubland to cut the road ahead. In the stillness of the night, the machinery of a nation's defense began to move. At 4:06 a.m., the convoy met its end. A 3-way junction near Canaliba became the snare. Drones hovered overhead, capturing the scene. Special units emerged from the dark, rifles steady. Engines stalled. The drivers froze in place, some trembling, one attempting to reverse only to be blocked by another armored vehicle. The silence grew thick. And then, the first tarpaulin was torn back. What lay beneath the sacks of rice was not food. It was not aid. It was an arsenal. Dark green ammunition crates, fresh paint glinting under torchlight. Locks cracked open. Inside, brand new AK-47s. Beside them, M16 rifles sealed in foam casings. Grenade launchers wrapped in oilcloth. Pouches of 7.62mm rounds stacked like grain sacks. One truck revealed radio jammers and tactical vests. Another, encrypted communications gear. Not a single truck was empty. Every vehicle was a piece of a puzzle. A puzzle designed not for profit, but for mobilization. A rolling armory disguised as mercy. Back in the command center, General Zerbo's voice came through, firm and unflinching. "Mr. President, you need to hear this yourself." The line was passed to Traore. Captain Kabor's voice carried across the signal, weighted with the gravity of revelation. "Sir, this isn't aid. It is a mobile army." Traore did not hesitate. His command was clear. Detain every driver. Lock down the perimeter. Track every plate. Trace every signal. Map their origins within 2 hours. By dawn, patterns began to emerge. The trucks had not all come from one province. Some carried false registration from distant regions. Others switched SIM cards only hours before the interception. Routes diverged and converged like a dance deliberately choreographed to appear chaotic. Yet the timing betrayed precision. Someone had designed the mess. Someone had paid for perfection. Technicians scraped serial numbers off crates. Beneath the scratches, origins came into focus. One batch matched post-Civil War surplus from Libya. Another traced back to Yemen. But the most startling discovery lay stamped faintly on pristine boxes, codes from factories under NATO oversight in southern Europe. The air in the command room grew heavier. Eyes met across the table. The question was not whispered. It was shouted by the silence itself. Who had the power to move such weapons invisibly across borders? Who dared to target Burkina Faso first? The value was staggering. Logistics officers calculated at least $700 million in weaponry. And that was without counting encrypted systems, drone parts, or high-grade explosives. This was no smuggler's game. This was not contraband for profit. This was declaration, silent yet unmistakable. Somewhere far beyond Burkina Faso's borders, a decision had been made. Destabilize, remove, replace. The soil of this nation had yielded many harvests, sorghum, maize, rice. But never before had it seen seeds of destruction planted with such care, with such cunning. And as soldiers tightened the cordon around Canalaba, as drones scanned the sky for accomplices, a darker truth settled over Ouagadougou. This was not the end of the story. It was only the beginning. If 48 trucks could slip so close to the nation's heart, what other shadows were waiting to be uncovered? The hours after the Canalaba interception did not bring rest. They brought revelation. At 6 in the evening, the National Security Council gathered in Ouagadougou. Ministers, intelligence chiefs, commanders, all sat beneath the glare of fluorescent light. Tension clung to every breath. President Ibrahim Traoré did not waste words. He placed both palms flat on the map spread before him. His voice was measured, but every syllable struck like steel. This is not contraband. It is a declaration. We move tonight, and move they did. By midnight, 23 warehouses across the capital were raided. Soldiers poured into compounds under the cover of darkness. Steel doors groaned open. Floodlights exposed the hidden. 17 of those warehouses held military stockpiles. Rifles stacked in pyramids. Mortar tubes resting against walls. Crates of encrypted radios. Camouflage uniforms packed by the hundreds. Satellite communication rotors still linked to foreign servers. In Warehouse 9A, soldiers discovered 4 tons of high-velocity explosive gel, labeled as mining supplies but packaged for demolition. In Warehouse 17C, beneath drone casings, lay training manuals printed in French and English. These were not for civilians. These were for trained pilots, for warfighters, for those prepared to tear a nation apart. Every new door opened revealed not chaos, but coordination. Cargo labels were forged with care, pointing to ports in Abidjan and Cotonou. Serial numbers traced back to Libya, Yemen, and Europe. And then came the arrests. 2 former ministers, one of the Interior, one of Energy. A retired general once trusted with international operations. 3 businessmen whose wealth touched every major contract in Burkina Faso. And 4 foreign nationals, 2 French, 1 American, 1 Israeli. Each carried diplomatic passports, but none matched official records of travel. The city shuddered. Streets whispered with rumors. Could betrayal wear a minister's suit? Could treason sit in a cabinet chair? And at 7:12 in the morning, a new name entered the chamber. François Bongo. For years, he had been untouchable, a magnate of West African finance, a philanthropist shaking hands in European capitals, a patron of NGOs and international forums. But that day, he sat under a single light in a high-security interrogation room. No cuffs, no resistance. His very presence was indictment enough. General Zerbo laid before him a dossier, intercepted calls, wire transfers from Cayman accounts, coordinates of warehouses already raided. He demanded one thing: tell us the truth. Bongo exhaled, folded his hands, and spoke words that chilled the air. This isn't about weapons. It was never about weapons. It was about timing, about power, about control. And then, 4 words that froze the chamber: Operation Restore Democracy. A projector flickered to life. Maps, ledgers, code names, budgets totaling $1 billion. Delegates had met in a cray inside a Sheraton hotel. Funds routed through Paris. Final approval traced to Washington. President Traore listened in silence. And then, quietly, he asked, "And if I fell?" Bongo's reply was instant. A transition council was ready. Ministries assigned. Uniforms tailored. I was promised Minister of Finance. We were all promised something. The revelation landed like thunder. This was no smuggler's gamble. No rogue trader's plot. This was orchestration scripted in hotel lobbies, wired through offshore accounts, planned to the detail of tailored uniforms. The chamber was silent, but every mind raced with the same truth. Burkina Faso was not meant to survive this night. And if one nation could be targeted with such precision, with such coordination, What other capitals were already waiting their turn? When the sun rose over Ouagadougou, the city did not wake to routine. It woke to revelation. Radios crackled with updates. Neighbors whispered across courtyards. Families gathered around battered speakers, listening as the truth spilled out. 48 trucks had carried not aid, but an arsenal. The shock was visceral. People asked one another, if they had succeeded, what would our tomorrow look like? The answer came easily, whispered in markets and in mosques. It would already be ashes. Politically, the impact was seismic. The arrest of 2 former ministers and a retired general shattered the illusion of governance as steady and trustworthy. Confidence in the old elite crumbled. Suspicion seeped into every office, every corridor of power. Opposition figures rushed to distance themselves from the conspiracy, fearing the stain of association. In a land where betrayal had long been rumored but rarely exposed, the televised evidence became a mirror no politician could avoid. For President Traore, the challenge cut both ways. On one side, his decisive action strengthened his image as a leader awake to danger. On the other, the scale of collusion revealed just how deep the rot had run. He could not simply silence the wound. He had to lay it bare. Trials were promised. Transparency declared. The people would see that treason, no matter how well dressed, would face the light of day. Economically, storms gathered quickly. Rumors of sanctions whispered across embassies. Western partners muttered about consequences for daring to expose crates stamped with foreign barcodes. But the threat of punishment did not break the streets. It galvanized them. Crowds surged through the capital, banners raised high. Trade not aid. Sovereignty is not for sale. And then came the moment that turned revelation into testimony. In the heart of Independence Square, engineers built a furnace taller than a man. Cameras rolled. Tens of thousands gathered. The people waited, breath tight with expectation. Traore lifted the first AK-47 seized from Truck 1. He raised it high, the steel catching the light, and with deliberate force, he cast it into the fire. Sparks leapt upward. Metal screamed as it melted. Flames roared. His words cut the air. They wanted war. We will give them schools. One by one, rifles disappeared into the fire. Grenade launchers, mortar tubes, crates of ammunition. Weapons meant for chaos became molten metal. Engineers channeled the flow into molds not shaped for bullets, but for bells. Those bells, Traore promised, would ring in classrooms across the nation. 100 new schools, 50 health clinics, 1,000 kilometers of irrigation lines. The arsenal of betrayal reborn as instruments of hope. Citizens wept. Teachers pledged to add the story of the 48 trucks to their curricula. Parents spoke of it as a second Independence Day, not a celebration of past liberation, but a commemoration of a disaster prevented. Even skeptics bowed to the reality. Never before had treason been so nakedly exposed, nor dignity so defiantly reclaimed. But victory carried risk. The purge of ministers and businessmen fractured alliances. Loyalists whispered of witch hunts. Foreign partners hinted at economic isolation. Stability and justice hung in a fragile balance. As dusk fell once more over the capital, the mood was not triumph. It was resolve. The nation had stared down one attempt, but vigilance could not end with a bonfire of weapons. A mother clutching her child in Independence Square spoke for many. We saw what they planned. Now we must guard against what they will plan next. And so the story of Burkina Faso moved forward, not into peace, not yet into prosperity, but into a season of watchfulness. The question rose from the square and echoed across the nation. If rifles can be melted into school bells, can betrayal itself be melted into lasting unity? When the furnaces roared in Independence Square, the fire was not contained by the borders of Burkina Faso. Its sparks leapt across oceans, carried by cameras, by satellites, by the restless hum of global media. Western outlets looped the same image again and again, rifles melting into liquid, pouring into molds shaped like bells. A single frame, yet 1,000 meanings. Some saw defiance, others saw provocation. All saw a continent daring to speak aloud what was once only whispered. In Washington and European capitals, statements of grave concern were issued. Behind closed doors, diplomats spoke plainly, accusing NATO-linked factories, accusing Washington itself. This will have consequences. Sanctions were weighed, aid packages reconsidered. The threat was sharp. Economic isolation for any nation that dared to pull the curtain back on hidden contracts. But the East rid the fire differently. Moscow released a statement of solidarity, declaring Burkina Faso's right to defend its sovereignty. Beijing moved pragmatically, offering firewalls for cyber defense and technology to jam hostile drones. Caracas called the moment Africa's Bolivarian turning point, linking the Sahel's defiance with South America's long struggle against foreign control. And across Africa, voices rose in a harmony rarely heard. Ghana declared, "Let this be our template." Mali and Niger proclaimed, "Never again will Africans be armed to destroy themselves." In South Africa, leaders told their people, "When children ask what victory looks like, show them this day." The African Union, often hesitant, now faced a mirror. Its envoy spoke with uncharacteristic weight. "If this is ignored, then our credibility is already broken." Global opinion split, but the imagery remained. Weapons into classrooms, betrayal into dignity, plots into pledges. These were not slogans of propaganda. They were realities burned into steel and witnessed by the world. And yet, behind the applause of allies and the warnings of critics, a sharper question grew louder in corridors of power. Could Burkina Faso survive the weight of standing alone at the center of this storm? The morning after the furnaces cooled, a quieter reckoning settled over Ouagadougou. The rifles were melted, the bells were cast, the financiers named. Yet the deeper question remained: what comes next? 3 paths stretched before Burkina Faso. The first was peril. Sanctions loomed like thunderclouds. Cables hinted at suspended loans, delayed aid, frozen assets. For a landlocked nation dependent on trade routes and foreign investment, such measures could bite as sharply as bullets. This was the punishment whispered from Western capitals: expose us and you will pay. The second was solidarity. From Bamako to Niamey, from Accra to Johannesburg, voices declared, "Your fight is our fight." If neighbors stood firm, if regional trade could be strengthened, then the weight of foreign pressure might be absorbed through partnership. Out of a plot meant to divide, there could emerge a coalition bound by shared resistance. The third was renewal. By turning rifles into school bells, by pledging 100 schools, 50 clinics, 1,000 kilometers of irrigation, Burkina Faso had offered not just a symbol, but a blueprint. Sovereignty, Traore declared, is not defended only at borders. It is built in classrooms, in hospitals, in fields. If delivered, those promises could transform suspicion into trust, despair into pride. But renewal demands vigilance. Networks of betrayal rarely dissolve in a single night. The chatter intercepted spoke of Phase 2 operations in Mali, of priority assets in Nigeria. Shadows still moved across the Sahel, and legitimacy remained a fragile question. Could a young captain who rose in defiance also govern in endurance? Would the people's fervor survive sanctions? Would symbols become structures? Yet in the silence that followed the flames, one truth could not be ignored. The continent was watching. From Lagos to Kinshasa, from Addis Ababa to Johannesburg, eyes turned to a small landlocked state that had dared to name its betrayal and to melt it in the open square. The road ahead is uncharted. It may bring hardship. It may bring hope. But the choice is no longer hidden in hotel lobbies or offshore accounts. It is carried in the ringing of bells cast from stolen rifles. And so, the question now echoes not only in Burkina Faso, but across Africa itself. If one nation can forge dignity from fire, what stops the rest of the continent from doing the same? My brothers and my sisters, we have walked through the silence of the night. We have stood at the junction where 48 trucks were stopped. We have seen betrayal unmasked, warehouses cracked open, ministers exposed, and financiers confess. We have watched rifles melt into bells, and we have heard the promise that children, not mercenaries, would inherit the future. But the story does not end with fire and steel. The true test is tomorrow. The true battlefield is not only in the deserts of the Sahel, but in classrooms, in clinics, in the dignity of daily life. Independence is not a date in the calendar. Independence is a decision renewed every dawn. The world still whispers its doubts. Powerful capitals still ask their questions. And the people of Africa must ask their own. Who signed the 48? Who believed that a continent's sovereignty could be purchased, that betrayal could be shipped like cargo? The answer matters not just for Burkina Faso, but for every nation that refuses to be treated as a warehouse rather than a homeland. Remember this: Traore's shock operation was not merely a security maneuver. It was a moral declaration. It was the testimony that when betrayal is exposed, it must be burned in the open square, not buried in silence. And so I say again, who signed the 48? We may not know every name today. We may not trace every account or expose every meeting. But what we do know is this: betrayal cannot erase dignity, and steel cannot silence the ringing of a bell. Now the burden rests not only on Burkina Faso, but on all of us, on the continent that watched, on the diaspora that remembers, on the elders who endured, on the children who will inherit. So I ask you, what future do you see? What chapter will you write? Will you remain silent, or will you carry this story forward? Do not merely watch. Do not merely listen. Share this testimony. Comment with your vision of the next chapter, and subscribe, not as a habit, but as a commitment to walk with us on this road of dignity and defiance. For history is not written only in treaties or in wars. It is written in nights like these. And tonight, Africa has chosen to write in fire, in bells, and in hope.